Great, thank you. All right. So just to recap everything I just said, I'll just say it one more time. This is a webinar sponsored by the American Statistical Association Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Outreach Group, aka JEDI. We strive to bring together individuals in statistics and data science who want to build just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive communities, improve professional pathways, develop and share best practices and guiding principles, which is the theme of our talk today, liaise and collaborate with other organizations, provide resources and educational opportunities, and raise public awareness of JEDI or DEI related issues. And today we're sponsoring this timely talk on writing fair letters of recommendation by Dr. Doreen Meinzer. Dr. Meinzer is the co-director of Faculty Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and co-director of the Center for Clinical and Translational Science and Training at the Academic Health Center of the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And with that, I will let her take it away.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and that just makes everything move all over on so everybody can see it okay. Thumbs up. Yes, great. All right, so I like interactive talks, and it's really hard to do that on Zoom, and I understand that. What I am going to ask then is when you have questions or you want to comment, please place them in the chat. I know that Eric and Donna can both read the chat if I miss it, and I have no problem with being stopped or interrupted so that we can answer the questions in the moment. Full disclosure, I have including my title slide and end slides. It's 38 slides. A lot of them are really fast paced because there's not much on them. I don't like a lot of words on my slides, and that's ironic because it's a slide about writing letters. And so it is about the words, and that makes having fewer words a little more difficult. And I want the purpose really of this talk is not to teach you how to write a letter. It's really around identifying and avoiding biases that we may impart ourselves when we're writing letters. And there's evidence that's supporting the biases that happen in this talk, and the evidence that is shown in these talks do come from research. And I have a list of references from that. A lot of the examples that I am going to be using are actually real world examples that have been taken from letters, either from the publications and the research that I had reviewed, or from my own experience as a member of our RPT committee for 7 years. And so I may have pulled some of the examples from those letters that I have found to be useful for the purpose of this talk. So just to give you a highlight of what we're going to discuss, we're going to briefly talk about who's impacted by biases and how those biases are written into letters. A lot of it is around terminology, so we will go over terminology. I have some examples that I hope I kind of get some engagement with this crowd, at least in the chat specifically. Summarizing and providing maybe some tips that I hope will be helpful. And then we are going to discuss, for those who are in the process of asking for letters of recommendation, we'll be able to hopefully take everything that we talk about today and put it into what's the best approach for asking letters for recommendation from somebody. We all do have to do it. So I'm going to think about the reasons why we might ask for letters, and these are academically minded letters, although I'm talking about biases that happen no matter where you ask for letters for recommendation. So undergraduate and getting into school in various programs, your graduate schools, your postdoc programs. If you're a new faculty member versus if you're a faculty member coming from another institution, promotions, that's a big thing, and letters tend to be a little different for promotions. And then, of course, evaluating or reviewing someone else's dossier for promotion, which does happen in many different institutions. For me, one of the important things, messages that I like to keep is that when someone asks you to write a recommendation letter or asks you to speak on their behalf as a reference, it is your goal to help them wholeheartedly. I am a firm believer of that. That is, we are advocates for each other, and that we don't want our letter to undermine the efforts that we put into writing it or their efforts that they have, because what we're talking about is holding their career in our hands. And I think keeping that understood helps with how we formulate and helps our framework for writing the letter, because that is exactly what's happening. When you're writing a letter of recommendation, you are in fact holding that person's career in your hands. And so if you can't effectively do that, then you can ask somebody else to do it. Someone else can step in and do it instead. I don't want to go into, this is the only slide about letter structure, but sometimes I think it's helpful, especially if there are members in the audience who are not quite familiar with writing letters or asking for letters. The basic letter structure is going to differ from institution to institution depending on the criteria. I really, as a reviewer of letters and as a writer of letters, I find that if you bold those topics that are of importance and that you're supposed to tackle, that helps the reviewers know exactly what section you're writing about. So we know that the intro paragraph is really highlighting who you are, so that there is context about your relationship with the person that you're writing the letter for. And that really does help sort of set the stage. We often write and focus on the discussion of scholarship and education. Those are extremely important in our field, especially as I think about the field of statisticians. I am an epidemiologist with heavy quantitative background. So I like to tell people that my advisor when I was getting my PhD was in fact a statistician. And so he treated me like one and not like an epidemiologist. I understand this. I play a biostatistician in many different roles. And so being able to highlight the scholarship and accomplishments in promotion letters is extremely important. And then when we're hitting sort of that associate to full professor level, we start thinking about leadership. We start thinking about where is the reputation of an individual nationally and internationally. And we also want to make sure we're not just regurgitating the CV. Our job is to tell an interesting story, and regurgitating the CV, I can read the CV, but not necessarily. I want to read something that excites me about an individual. And Eric, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, quick question. Are these slides available after the talk?
Yes, I am more than happy to share them.
Cool, thank you.
Nothing here is for proprietary information, so I love to share them. Absolutely. It is important for us that before I hit bias, it is important for us to understand what makes a successful letter. So having contextual and concrete comparisons of performance is great. Highlighting personalized examples, so having anecdotal stories keeps that letter interesting. That's your interesting story. Discussing the merits of the individual and the impact that the individual has had, specifically in the research space for a research or scientific field. And then offering your enthusiastic support. So it is very easy to read a letter and realize that that person is not overly enthusiastic about an individual. And it's a serious red flag. And people basically state that if you're not overly enthusiastic or exceptionally supportive, then there's something wrong with the individual. And that's the message that is conveyed. So we're going to talk a little bit about the biases that are written in letters. And this is based off of the science. So there's quite a bit of research in a variety of scientific fields that have focused on letters of recommendation for promotion and for tenure that are written for women and underrepresented minorities. And these letters tend to be shorter, so with fewer details. They tend to be less likely to highlight the publications or research quality of the individual. They also tend for the early career level individuals, they tend to be less likely talking about how that individual is a future leader. These biases are not intentional. They stem from a conscious, they don't stem necessarily from a conscious desire to impede progress. However, we all have some level of implicit bias within us that can easily come out in our writing if we're not really intentionally aware of it, or if we're not paying attention to what we're writing. The biases in the letters that are written for women and underrepresented minority faculty or graduate students, they also are more likely to include minimal assurance. So phrases like they can do the job, not they're exceptional at the job. There's also veiled praise. So this is sort of the surprisingly sharp as opposed to a ringing endorsement. So they happen to not necessarily, they tend to offer surprise that someone is smart enough to be able to actually accomplish those tasks. Particularly for individuals who are underrepresented minorities, they tend to also overemphasize backgrounds and limitations that individuals may have faced over their accomplishments. And they're more likely to also mention personal life that is irrelevant and could expose the details a candidate does not want to expose. So you may, in fact, know a lot more background about a specific candidate, maybe about her family life, maybe illnesses, etc. None of that goes into your letter. You don't have permission to put it into your letter, and it actually is irrelevant, especially if the individual is extremely accomplished and is able to do the job that they are doing. So we like to keep the personal life out of the letters. Despite meeting similar metrics, letters that are written for men tend to be more authentic than those written for women. So they are qualitatively different. They have more complexity and positivity written into them. And they also, letters written for women tend to emphasize work ethic rather than ability or talent. And so I don't like this one at all. We all want to say that she has a great work ethic, but I would argue that we all have a great work ethic or we all would not be here. And it's kind of a moot point. What we're talking about is her ability or talent to do the job and to do the job well. We want to stay away from those grindstone adjectives like being committed, being tireless. And women's letters often are described with fewer adjectives that suggest ability or talent. There's fewer standout adjectives. So, the magnificent, wonderful, amazing are less likely to be in letters written for women. And then finally, they are also more likely to have the feel or biologic process words. So words that display emotion tend to be found more in letters for women than men. So it's good to know what's all there and sort of what the research has said about these. And now we have to think about how we're going to use some of that information and knowledge. So before I write a letter, I actually force myself to pause about it. I don't jump into it right away. I like to think about the individual for a while. And I really want to think about what are the biases that I have about this individual. And and it can be about anything. I mean, sometimes the biases are, I'm in meetings with this person and they just jabber way too much and I can't stand it. But I like to think about those because if I acknowledge them and I identify them, then when I am writing my letter, I can make sure that I am not in some implicit or unconscious way putting those biases into my letter. What about the individual's trajectory? So my career looked one way and your career is going to look another way. And if I'm writing a letter for you and I don't like the way your trajectory is, if you took a 6-month leave of absence, if you took longer to get promoted, those are biases I may have about your trajectory that actually are not helpful nor meaningful in a letter. And then the institution. So you have to think about the biases you have in institutions. We all think some institutions are better than others. And so when we write a letter about someone who's coming out of Harvard, we want to say how amazing it is that they came out of Harvard. But we don't tend to say those same things about some of the state schools or potentially some even lesser known schools that we know nothing of. So I'd like to think about what are the where my biases might be around the individual's institutions. And I would say, as somebody who, as a graduate here of a community college, I'm very, very, very cognizant of that particular bias. And then what have I displayed in my previous letters? So I keep all my letters and I go back. And if I look at the letter that I wrote 10 years ago to the letters I write today, they are vastly different. And I like to keep them because I also like to identify where I may have made mistakes in terms of integrating biases into a letter. And so every time I have I write a new letter, I'm pulling up my old letters, and I'm not just reviewing them to copy and paste the verbiage, but did I say that right? Do I need to say it differently? And so I think it's important that we reflect on that. Every single letter that you write always has to use professional titles. How we address the individual influences a reader tremendously. And I don't know if we've also come across this, but we tend to use first names a lot for women and for minority faculty, and we tend to use titles for men. We do this not just in letters, but we do this in how we present individuals. You could be on a panel and the men will all be doctor and the woman will be a first name. So, and it makes you feel differently. So Joan was an asset to our program. Joan to me is my next door neighbor, is someone across the street. I'm going to have dinner with her. We're going to hang out. Joan is fun. Dr. Smith was an asset to our program to me, says Dr. Smith was a professional. Dr. Smith is going to actually get something done. I want to emulate Dr. Smith. So there's a very different vibe with how we actually refer to the individual. So anytime I'm reviewing someone else's letter, I always correct the name to go always to their actual last name with their title. And does not matter how long their last name is. And I have had some pretty long last names. And it's just, I'm just going to make the letter longer because we're going to only use their last name. Biases in letters. Once you get past sort of how we're going to address an individual and the biases I may have about like their educational background, they also manifest in many ways around the terminology. So the terms that we use will to describe our different applicants or our different faculty are going to be different. We use doubt-raising language, and how doubt-raising language and faint praise is often sort of embedded into these letters. And then the career trajectory bias, which I did mention before, which is often an irrelevant bias that we tend to like to insert into our letters. It is important to know that these differences exist in who is writing the letter. So men and women write letters differently, and then who the letter is, for whom the letter is written. So men and women, for example, receive letters differently. So communality and agency. This is a framework that describes traditional masculine and feminine domains of Western society. And so agency, we are thinking about the male stereotype of achievement-oriented focus. I mean, we're talking about being competent and aggressive and independent. And communality is a feminine stereotype, and this is really around being relationship oriented, so kind and helpful and sympathetic. And these terms are actually used very, very frequently in the letters that we write. So agency or agentic terms, they reflect concerns about meeting one's own needs. So your behaviors of leadership and confidence are going to be around agency terms. You're ambitious, you're self-confident, you're a leader. These are ones that make people realize, yes, that's the kind of person that I want to be, or I want to be like, or I love writing about this type of person. Communal terms, they're more about interpersonal skills. So these are the skills that everybody says are the hardest to achieve, and yet they tend to be the weakest when we're writing letters, and which is sad, but this is the truth. So we're talking about behaviors of empathy and sympathy, how we interact with each other. You're warm and you're nurturing and have a pleasant demeanor. These are extremely important, but they are not going to get you promoted. Not if you write an entire letter of communal terms. If you write an entire letter of agency terms, no one's going to blink twice. So I think that's just something to think about. It does not mean that we don't write about communal terms. In fact, the most interesting letters that I have read or have written include communal terms because they're so vastly important and they tell me that person's human. But you have to be very intentional about how you write that. So you have to tie those terms to a specific role. So for example, she is skilled at building relationships and fearless about having difficult conversations. Those are all about her, sort of the communalism. component of that individual. This is an asset because she is leading a multidisciplinary, complex program, because she needs to XYZ. So tie those skills to something. It's important to note that men and white faculty members or applicants, they tend to be described using agentic terms. And women and people of color, they tend to be described using communal terms. And this is just something that we naturally do. And men tend to use more agentic terms for male letters. So, as I said, all letters have both terms. Placement of these matter. In some cases, you could have an entire paragraph that only describes communal characteristics. So humility and integrity are her strongest characteristics. She's highly receptive to feedback and never needs to be told anything. So this is the opportunity. Like I said, I want a little engagement. I would love to hear your reaction in the chat about this statement. And these statements, these are actual true statements that were pulled from letters. Not ones I'd written, but pulled from letters from the research that I've done. So does someone want to venture and write in the chat what they think about this statement? No wrong answers. Positive, negative, touchy-feely. No. No one has any thoughts? Well, thank you. Demeaning never needs to be told anything. Yes, I can't stand that never needs to be told anything. Like, why would we say that? Because it just feels highly receptive to feedback and never needs to be told anything, to me feels like you're talking about a dog. That was my first reaction when I read that. And if humility and integrity are her strongest characteristics, they may be, but it says nothing about her ability to do this job. For letters who are written for white faculty, communal terms tend to be framed positively. And for letters who are written for underrepresented minority faculty, the communal terms tend to be framed negatively. And often they're linked to conjunctions like but or despite. So he is amazing despite. He has great strengths in X, Y, and Z, but anytime you stick a conjunction in there, like but or despite, you've automatically framed whatever you said in a negative light. It does not matter what you've said. I'm going to read it negatively, that there is something that you are doing and having to overcome to do it. So here's an example, and we're going to see if you guys only have to write positive or negative. X is simultaneously a compassionate caregiver and an intellectually curious scientist. So let's just start. Positive or negative when you read this statement? Right, I'm seeing it. Okay, yes, positive, right? There's compassionate. So what we have here are positive characteristics. We have compassionate, so that's communal. And we have intellectual, that is an agency term. And there's an and in there. If I said compassionate but intellectually curious, you would already say, well, compassionate must be a bad word because intellectual is a good word. So now we know this is like a well-rounded individual and we love it. All right. X has a very understated style that I appreciate, but has quite a remarkable fund of knowledge in cardiology for her state of training. Positive or negative? And it's okay to not totally know. All right, I see negative, because it's a confusing statement. So I am going to go with negative. And the author of the paper that reviewed these also went with negative. And we'll pull out some of those characteristics. So we'll start with, there is a but. The minute there's a but, I'm like, well, something's negative about this. For her state of training, this is a career trajectory bias that we're seeing right here, that there's something about this state of training, her early career trajectory, that I want to pull out, and I made it negative. And then I'm going to say that I have no idea what that means. I don't even know what an understated style means. It's not helpful. It tells me nothing. If she has a remarkable fund of knowledge, then we can say she has a remarkable fund of knowledge in cardiology, period. Nothing else needs to be said. And I think this is okay. X is not the type of resident, this might be the last one, who calls attention to herself, but her medical knowledge, commitment, etc., and work ethic are readily apparent. Negative or positive? It's okay to be confused by it too. Yeah, in the middle, positive, maybe negative, confused. Exactly. It's a confusing. We should not be confused by the letters we write or read. So, all right. So yes, so you guys are pulling out how difficult it is. So I'm going to say that it was more in the negative characteristics, only because the researcher who did the study said that. I am going to say some of the words. So calls attention to herself, not the type of who calls it. I don't know what that means. And then there's a button there. And so the minute there's a button there, that means that the calls attention to herself was supposed to be a negative view, even if it's not the type who calls attention to herself, there's a negativity to that. And then there's a work ethic thrown in there, which work ethic doesn't tell me anything except that she's a good worker. And like I said, that we're all here, we all have a good work ethic. Nobody should be questioning our work ethic. So this really goes to that premise that words matter deeply. So we want to choose our adjectives wisely. We want to make sure that we know when we're using adjectives, which ones are in fact communal adjectives, and use them in conjunction with those words that are in fact agentic adjectives. I like to keep a list of adjectives that I like to pull from, and I use thesaurus tremendously when it comes to adjectives. So I also like to keep statements of things I think sound amazing so that I can figure out how to rework them into other people's letters later. All right. We also want to pay attention to use of gendered references. And you know, gender is fluid, and it's becoming more apparent how fluid it is. So it's extremely important for you to be able to use the appropriate gendered pronouns, gender identity pronouns within your letter, and make sure that you have permission to do so. And I say this because not everybody wants the provost or whoever has to okay these letters to get confused by what they're reading and have a problem with the pronouns. And so you don't want that, and you want somebody to say it's okay. So if I were somebody who used she and they, I would say it's okay to use they. Please feel free. But I do feel like that needs to have a permission attached to that. Otherwise, I tend to stay away from this. Don't call anybody a female or a man in your letters. It's not necessary. Letters written for women tend to have their physical appearance referenced more, their smile. And it's not in a negative way. Their smile and her smile lights up a room. It's in an irrelevant way, and it's not important, and it does not help. So we'd like to say nothing about gendered references and nothing about physical appearances. We don't mention personal life. We want to make sure we're very careful about how deep into someone's individual personal life we ever get in our letters. We don't characterize their family responsibilities. We don't talk about how many children they have, how many kids they buried along the way. It does not matter if somebody leaves every day to go coach soccer or to coach anything, we leave it out. It is irrelevant. And it is not necessarily viewed as a positive either. And so when we think about letters written for women, their accomplishments are often juxtaposed to the fact that they're also have a supportive family that's helped them through the process. It doesn't help your promotion, and it actually just sort of it turns into a negative for the woman. And irrelevancy. So we don't want irrelevant statements. I don't care that she can ski. I don't care that she collects stamps or cooks. And then I care about what the role demands. I should not care about where her weaknesses are. So her research record is not methodologic, since that is not what her role has demanded. If I don't expect her ever in her role to be someone who's heavily into stats methods, because she does applied method, or she does applied stats and she's off doing that, then I should not ding her for not doing methodologic research. It's an irrelevant statement, and it introduces self-doubt. And then we're not going to do stereotypes, right? We're not going to invoke whether she's emotional. We're not going to talk about arrogancies. We're not going to invoke anything. We're not going to talk about where they previously came from and say they overcame some barrier because of that particular state school or going to inner city schools. None of it is relevant. Okay, are we good? Making sure no questions. Everyone's happy. Yeah. All right. We are going to avoid doubt raisers. So praising the individual and couching each comment in a statement that either suggests or states outright that it is surprising the individual achieved it. So even though Dr. A is not from the US, he still manages to do XYZ. It is a doubt raiser. It says to me that you didn't think he could do it. We want to, there's three main types. So there's their blatant negativity. So it is true she does not have much previous experience. She's not the best student, but I'm still, doesn't matter. Faint praise. So remember I said faint praise and hedging tends to happen a lot more for letters that are written for underrepresented minorities. So he frequently completes most required tasks. I would say that's a good thing, but it's not a totally good thing because he's not always doing all tasks, so it's not good enough. And hedging. So she's not the best statistician, but she's a good one. The first sentence is irrelevant anyway. Just say she's a good statistician. He responds well to feedback. And this is where I go, so do dogs. It doesn't matter. Move on. So we're not going to hedge our hedge the positives. You're either going to full out be positive or you're not going to say it at all. And this just undermines their experience and expertise. It also undermines the way you and the time that you've put into writing these letters. Okay. X has already demonstrated an interest in research. While in medical school, he conducted research to improve the quality of care for patients. He designed an analysis that measured, he identified areas of quality improvement. So this came directly from a letter. How do we feel about this one? Feels good. Like you read it and you think positive, do you? Do you think like, wow, he's great, accomplished, huh? It's describing someone who's a little more advanced in their career with active verbs that frame him as somebody with high potential. Someone who is in the exact same career like trajectory. So someone who is at the same level. Over the course of her academic training, X has been involved in research. She's worked on several accomplished teams. She has been working on a project in the use of. So also doing things, research and teams and projects. And what is the difference? Why am I not excited? Passive, yeah. So has been involved in research, has worked on teams, has been working on a project. I think we tend to use passive language oftentimes because I think we feel like it writes better. It sounds better when we write it. This is an area that I personally am working on better, is being a more active writer. But yes, when we describe them as passive and we use weaker verbs, we are actually saying that she's not at that high potential level as her counterpart that we just saw. We want to mention our critical accomplishments. So I think that when I think about the field of statistics, this is an area that I think is very important, because many individuals in the area of statistics are collaborators, they're partners, they're part of a team. Yes, there are great accomplished PIs that are statisticians, and there's great accomplished individuals who are co-investigators on grants, and there's great accomplished individuals who are part of a larger team who do amazing things. We have to know how to write those letters. We have to highlight the importance of team science in all of this. We have to make sure that we use all of those strong active verbs and strong agency words to describe the individual. We want to make sure we're giving credit to visionaries, to big picture people. We want to kind of not talk just about being supportive. Women tend to have their letters written as they are in a supportive role, supporting other individuals, and not so much as doing stuff for themselves. And we want to be able to do this without qualifying it. So qualifying statements. So-and-so is poised, confident, but maintains a pleasant demeanor. So-and-so is confident, polite, and humble, yet highly skilled. Do not say someone overcame something or has children at home and still managed to be productive. None of that matters. That they are poised, they are confident, they are productive, they are highly skilled. Those are the things we care about. We don't need to qualify that. We don't need to always balance it with, but she's a nice person. Okay. So just sort of summarizing everything I said, formal titles and surnames for both men and women. We are very important. We want to emphasize accomplishments, right? His research, her career, not effort. Effort, remember, we can leave effort for the dogs. Dogs give us effort. People will give us the accomplishments. We want to tie soft skills to a specific role. So we, like you said, we want to make sure that we're tying that skill to an asset. We want lengthened letters. You can provide ringing endorsements and not minimal assurance in your letters. You don't want to hold back on those endorsements, and you don't want to qualify the praise with something else. Just give praise. We don't want to invoke our gender, racial, and ethnic stereotypes at all. We don't want to raise doubt. So it's so easy. And I think you had enough examples to say how easy it is to raise doubt about an individual or to make somebody sound a little subpar than they actually are. And we don't want to rush through the evaluation. So when you're evaluating someone's dossier or their CV, you don't want to rush through that and make snap judgments about them. You really want to sit on it and think about it. When I think about some helpful tips, I definitely think about your personal statement. So when someone is writing a letter for you, they need your CV. And what is so helpful is a personal statement. And if you haven't written one, I highly suggest it. You can call it a paragraph. You can make it a page, not too terribly long. It doesn't need to be your life story. But the passion, your passion comes out in there. And that's the passion that somebody like me who's writing a letter pulls out of that I don't have in your CV. And it also allows me as the writer to understand how you, as the recipient of my letter, or as the person, my focus of my letter, how you view your contributions to science, because you know it way better than I do. And so I think personal statements are very, very important. If you know the person who's writing your letter, highlighting specifics in the CV for the person is so helpful. So if I am asking Eric, let's say, to write a letter for me, I'm going to highlight the areas in my CV that I may want him to pay attention to. I may even tell him what I want him to write about when it comes to me. Your CV, if you can, I would annotate it. So there are pieces, especially this is so important for the CV of a methodologist, statistician, biostatistician. And I say that because oftentimes the contributions to science get overlooked. And if you can annotate your CV to say, and I was the lead, I did this, I did that, it allows the committees and the people writing your letters to better understand your contributions. When you're writing letters, keeping a list that you would pull from is important. Keeping previous letters that you received, that you loved, is important so that you can borrow phrases. Jotting other people's letters. So this is the same as what I just said. And then the hardest thing you'll ever do is write your own letter. And most people want you to write a letter for them anyway, so that they can edit it. That's the easiest way to write a letter. Give me a draft and I'll edit like crazy. But starting it from scratch can be the hardest thing for people to do. If you can write your own letter, as you were promoting yourself, you will actually be able to identify the biases you tend to write in letters, and then you can learn to remove them. If you can write a good letter for yourself, you can write an amazing letter for anybody else, because writing letters for yourself is the hardest thing to do. So I'm going to pause there. I have a couple more slides just for individuals who may have to ask for letters and are not sure how to go about that, to see if anybody had any questions. Okay, I will keep going then. So I just have a few slides because I also know that asking for letters is hard, and trying to identify people that ask for letters sometimes is really hard. And we all who write letters a lot, and I write a lot of letters over the years I have, I do enjoy writing letters, and I enjoy being asked to write letters. I feel like it's an honor and a privilege to have that opportunity to do so. And I've written letters for people that I've barely known. I've evaluated people's dossiers, and so that's one thing. I've written letters for people that I've barely known. I may have taught them in an introduction to EPI course once, and hardly do them in that context. And I've written for letters for people that I've known for many, many years. So I feel like I'm not perfect by any stretch of the word. I have a handle on sort of how people have approached me and how I've approached people and madly done it. And I can tell you that my first letter of recommendation was as an undergrad, when I thought I wanted to go to medical school, and I had nobody guided me. I didn't have an advisor. I don't know how I thought I was going to get to med school, but I had to have letters of recommendation for my medical school application. And I had a zoology professor, and I asked him for a letter, which he kindly gave me. I have no idea what it said. I don't think I would have ever liked reading it, to be honest with you, because I liked his class. I felt like from a teacher perspective, he probably knew me better than other teachers, but from his perspective, he probably didn't know who I was at all. And so honestly, I'm pretty sure his letter is not why I didn't get to med school, but I can probably also say it probably didn't help. And that makes you really think. And I thought about that moment because it was the awkwardest moment. And I didn't have a resume. I didn't have a track record with him. I was just a student to face. So when we're thinking about asking someone for a letter of recommendation, we really have to think about who we're asking and how well do they know me and how long have they known me and whether I've even ever spoken to that person. And then why am I asking, right? Is it because of grades or engagement or participation? Am I desperate? And then what I want them to say. And then, approaching and how much time to give them. I think, to write a letter. These are the things you have to think about when you're asking people. And it does not matter at what level of life you are. These are all of the same things you have to think about when you're asking somebody to write you a letter. And so if it helps, when I think about asking somebody to write a letter, when people have asked me to write a letter, they give me explicit requirements and deadlines. They provide me with their personal statement about them. That is the most helpful thing I have ever had. They remind me of how they know me. So if it's someone I don't know very well, it's, I took your class, I really was inspired, I want to go to get my MPH somewhere, would you write me a letter? And I spoke to the things I could speak to. And then when I'm asking someone to write me a letter, I am explicit about what I want them to say, because every person I ask is going to say something different. So if I'm asking someone over here, I want you to really speak to my independent research program because you know that about me the best. And I want you to really speak to me being the most amazing, teacher, because you could speak to that educational arm. And I want someone else to speak to something else because that's what they know me about. Eric.
Yeah, can you give an example of a personal statement?
Oh, a personal statement. Well, I can. My personal statement, which I wrote many years ago when I was last promoted, was 1 page long. And I think it started out with my career goal was, I've written them where it's my passion is. It walks somebody through a little bit of the journey of why they're in the place that they're in. What about that being in that place makes you so excited? Why do I do the research that I do, and why I'm going to do what I plan on doing in the future? So I kind of liken it to sort of like, let me tell you my life story in 1 page and where I'm going in 1 page. You don't get graded by your personal statement. I think they're used just to guide people to know, like, well, who you are and what do you want to be when you grow up. They're extremely helpful. Yeah, no, you're welcome. It's a great question. So yes, be explicit about what people are writing for you. It's helpful to, like I said, highlight the sections of your CV. So if I'm going to ask someone to write me a letter and I want to be explicit, I need you to talk about the work that I do in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm going to highlight my CV, all the areas that have that space. So you can see sort of the breadth and the depth of work that I do. And then I'm going to hand that to you, and I'm going to hand you my personal statement, and I'm going to give you the deadline, and I'm going to tell you who the letter needs to go to, and I'm going to hand you this beautiful package. And if I'm really smart, I'll write the letter for you. And it will sound really bad because we don't write good letters, but I know that you'll have a start and you'll just dump in your stuff. And people are so appreciative of letters that have already been written. So ultimately, when you're asking someone, like in the beginning, I talked about when someone asks you, but this one is when you ask someone to write a recommendation letter or speak on your behalf. Your goal is to select individuals who can help you wholeheartedly. And so don't ask your zoology professor who might have taught, hundreds and hundreds of undergrad students, and you have not bothered to engage the entire time you've been with this person. You want to really think critically about people who are going to be your sponsor and your advocate for whatever it is the journey that you're on. So these are references for you. There's a couple references here that are links that I find very helpful. One here are the links at the bottom here. These are all one-pagers about avoiding bias in letter writings, either racial bias or gender bias. I have those one pagers on my door in my office facing outside. So everybody who comes to my door in my office can see that there are biases in letter writings that they have to be cognizant of. This first one up here is a link to a website that has an algorithm that allows you to copy your letter, plug it in there, and it will actually divide up every word that you have to be both masculine and feminine, agency, communal words, so that you can evaluate your own letters that you're writing about as to, well, how many communal words am I using? And am I using enough of the others? And some of them, they call them male and female or feminine and masculine. And some of them you don't think so. So the word teaching, I think it's shoved under feminine, mainly because those are the words that are used more in female letters than male letters. And that's how the program was created. So it's not that the words in one camp versus the other are bad words or good words, but what you're looking for is a definite balance. And honestly, a little more leaning to the masculine or the agency words, because those are your active words, those are your strong words, those are the words that get you promoted. And so I always do that with every letter. I just copy it, plug it in there, run it, and go, oh, that's pretty good. Or, oh, I need a change. So I am going to stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing, which you'll give me a second while it messes everybody there. All right. So we have just a few minutes. Any questions, thoughts, anything I missed? Oh, how do you recommend handling a situation when you're not extremely enthusiastic about the person? Oh, that is such a great question. Yeah. So when someone comes to me and needs to have a promotion and is not, and I'm not enthusiastic, I mean, I can take two choices. I can write an unenthusiastic letter, which is not ideal. It wastes your time. It wastes their time. I think having a conversation about why you don't feel like you're the best person to write that letter is probably the best way to go about it. And you can phrase that conversation in any way you want. It can be, here are the reasons why I feel like I might not be the best person to write you the strongest letter of recommendation. Or it can be, I seriously have no time, which you can always use if you really felt like a backdoor. But I like being honest and just letting them know, because sometimes they don't know that they have their own blinders on and don't realize it. They will find somebody, or they won't, because they truly are not ready for promotion. Yeah, I will, Eric, if I can send you the slides. Yeah.
Actually, Jaren, if you would send them to me, I'll make sure that we include them when I post the recording on the
Very
website.
well. Yeah, no, I can do that. Yeah, and if there's anything you feel like I missed, because I just focused on the biases of just getting us to think differently about letter writing. I am more than happy to take that feedback. I just started doing this because I realized that oftentimes we suck at this part of our work, and I wanted to be better personally.
Yeah, I wanted to give you a shout out that there's a lot of self-reflection that is very clear in what you presented. So thank you for codifying it for all of us and sharing your experience. I am personally in the middle of, which is rarer, I think, on my side. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm in industry, and I've been asked to write a letter recently. So there you go.
Yes. No. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
And so did our audience, Jaren. I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but there's a lot of affirmation of the wonderful presentation.
No, I appreciate that very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you, Donna. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. No, thank
right.
you. It was good seeing you, Eric.
Yeah, good seeing you too.
Bye, everyone.